On February 21st, 1986, The Legend of Zelda first appeared on store shelves across Japan. At a time when the family computer had reached mainstream success and stood at a crossroads, the game was a shock to the system, a watershed moment when video games moved beyond levels and high scores and opened the door to a world that felt endless and infinite. 40 years later, the Zelda series is cherished by millions around the world, and the original game is held in the highest regard as one of the most important and best video games ever made. When The Legend of Zelda first went on sale in Japan in February 1986, Nintendo was king of the mountain. The family computer had been around for almost 3 years and was far and away the best-selling, most popular TV game machine in the land of the rising sun. The most success came from Super Mario Bros., a game starring its flagship character, Mario, in what was the biggest game of 1985 in size, scope, and sales, quickly becoming the best-selling game ever in Japan. The Legend of Zelda was planned to be the next big game following Super Mario Bros. The only way to go above and beyond Mario was to break the bounds of the family computer itself. When The Legend of Zelda went on sale on that very first day, the game wasn't on a cartridge, but a floppy disk. It all goes back to 1983. When Nintendo was designing the family computer, company president Hiroshi Yamauchi insisted that the hardware be commercially viable for at least 3 years. The main engineer behind the project, Masayuki Uemura, complied, though technical limitations played a role in the projected lifespan of the family computer more than his boss's decree. The design of the family computer came down to 2 core ideas: affordability and durability. A low-cost 8-bit CPU ran the games, which were heavy plastic cartridges, referred to as cassettes in Japanese due to their similar size and shape. This design had limits. Each family computer cartridge could hold a maximum of 320 kilobits of data, 40 kilobytes in the new math, which were divided into 2 parts: the PRG-ROM, which holds the game program, all the data for the levels, scoring system, and music, as well as a CHR-ROM, which holds the character data. Graphical elements like the game's heroes, villains, and background tiles are stored here. The PRG-ROM had a maximum size of 256 kilobits. The CHR-ROM, 64 kilobits. Many of the early family computer games, like Donkey Kong and Mario Bros., were under this limit. The games were very close to the arcade and affordable, perfect for kids and adults. On day 1, July 15, 1983, the 3-year clock started to count down, weighing heavy on those working behind the scenes. More advanced games would follow, but these could only go so far before hitting the technical wall. With larger memory sizes also came higher prices. The games of 1983 were only 3,800 yen, but by 1984, games over 5,000 yen started to appear, and by 1985, were commonplace. The competition would eventually leapfrog over the family computer with newer, better hardware. It already happened with the Sega Mark III in 1985. 16-bit was only a few years away. And while not necessarily a problem, the family computer was growing in popularity, leaving Nintendo stuck with the family computer for the time being. It couldn't be replaced with something else without abandoning customers who had just gotten on board. With all of this coming to a head very soon, engineer Masayuki Uemura began to work on a solution in the last months of 1984. A floppy disk drive that attached to the family computer cartridge slot and expanded the capabilities of the base hardware. Software, officially called disk cards, could hold up to 1 megabit of data, 512 kilobits on each side, allowing memory sizes that were impossible on a cartridge. Internally, the disk system included enhancements to in-game music with one extra channel of sound and additional RAM, allowing for game data to be rewritten back to the disk to be saved for later. A high score wouldn't disappear forever, and a game left half-finished could continue from that point, even after the power turned off. Furthermore, disc card games came at a much lower price, 2,500 yen. A game that used a full disc card was over 5 times larger than a typical game from 1983, at about 1/3 of the price. Customers could also purchase a blank disc for 2,000 yen and write new games on it for only 500 yen using disc writer machines. If someone were bored with the current game on a disc card, it could be replaced over and over. All of this required an initial investment of 15,000 yen, about $80 for the disk system. It cost slightly more than the base family computer itself, but with only a handful of games, it paid for itself and then some. Cheaper games wouldn't be enough to bring the masses on board. There had to be something more that drew people in. Much like Super Mario Bros., which moved millions of units, Nintendo needed something else appealing and groundbreaking to make the investment worthwhile. As the disk system was in development, the family computer continued its forward trajectory as the most popular TV game machine in Japan. With the eventual transition to disks on the horizon, chief game developer Shigeru Miyamoto began to produce 2 projects at the end of 1984 that would define the era. Super Mario Bros. Was designed to show off all that was possible on the family computer. 32 levels that scrolled left to right, filled with secrets, took practice and strategy to complete, and, above all, were very fun. It was meant to serve as a grand finale to the cartridge format. Developed alongside it was what became The Legend of Zelda, the grand opening to the next era of Nintendo games. The co-development of Mario and Zelda in parallel helped define what each one became. Mario was fast-paced and very linear. There was always a running timer. Speed was essential. Points were given out as rewards. There were many secrets, but most of them were easy enough to find. The game starred Nintendo's most well-known face, already defined and understood by audiences, and what style of game he was suited for. Zelda was meant to be slower, open-ended, and non-linear, with no scoring system nor any traditional levels, but have a clear, definitive ending. There would be secrets, like in Mario, but not outwardly discoverable. It would take smarts, skill, and luck to decipher some of the game's toughest riddles. The hero would be an all-new character, one that the player could experience the game through, rather than simply following the story from his point of view. Miyamoto drew from personal experiences, a habit that often appears in games he produces. As a child, he would visit his grandparents, who lived in rural Kansai, Japan. He often roamed the countryside alone, discovering and exploring without any help. In his grandparents' house, he would sometimes get lost, moving around the many rooms that had sliding doors separating them. These memories laid the foundation for what became The Legend of Zelda. The concept of different worlds, one very open, one closed, that were connected, began to take shape. He shared these ideas with co-collaborator Takashi Tezuka. The vast landscape became the overworld. The claustrophobic rooms became the underworld. Shifting between these areas led to the name of the main character, Link. The one who can link worlds together and link the player with the world inside the game. With discovery as a key component, the need for items to find and their purpose began to arise. Link can collect weapons, tools, power-ups, and money to support him on his journey. Things like ladders and keys help expand the adventure into areas that are out of reach from the start. A special item was invented that gave the entire quest a purpose. In early drafts, items called power triangles were placed in the underworld. Finding each one serves as a progress marker in the game. Finding them all completes the quest. The name evolved from power triangles to a triangle with a forceful power. the Triforce. The game's themes and settings were designed to be very sparse, allowing the players at home to be the hero, draw their own conclusions about what to do next, and not be so guided by what the game dictated. However, a concrete story was required to bring the game to life. Miyamoto and Tezuka continued to draft up ideas. An evil wizard who sought the power of the Triforce to conquer the land, and imprisoned the rightful princess in the process. The bad guy was named Ganon, the kingdom, Hyrule, and the princess, Zelda, inspired by early 20th century socialite Zelda Fitzgerald. In a world that is mystical and enigmatic, Princess Zelda conveyed many feelings. Someone who was beautiful, powerful, and admired, from a faraway place a long time ago. With that, her name was attached to the game, not Link. Unsure of what the future may bring, and leaving the door open for later sequels, the subtitle, The Hyrule Fantasy, was attached as well. There were still many gaps in the story, leading Miyamoto and Tezuka to recruit Keiji Terui, a screenwriter for the anime series Dragon Ball, to bring the world of Hyrule to life. A long, long time ago, the world was in an age of chaos. In a little kingdom in the land of Hyrule, a legend was being handed down from generation to generation. The legend of the Triforce. Golden triangles possessing mystical powers. One day, an evil army attacked this peaceful little kingdom and stole the Triforce of power. This army was led by Ganon, the powerful Prince of Darkness. Fearing his wicked rule, Zelda, the princess of this kingdom, split up the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 fragments and hid them throughout the realm to save the last remaining Triforce from the clutches of the evil Ganon. At the same time, she commanded her most trustworthy nursemaid, Impa, to secretly escape into the land and find a man with enough courage to destroy the evil Ganon. Upon hearing this, Ganon grew angry, imprisoned the princess, and sent out a party in search of Impa. But wait, all was not lost. A young lad appeared. He skillfully drove off Ganon's henchmen and saved Impa from a fate worse than death. His name was Link. Bursting with a sense of justice, Link resolved to save Zelda. But Ganon was a powerful opponent. He held the Triforce of Power, and so in order to fight him, Link had to bring the scattered 8 fragments of the Triforce of Wisdom together to rebuild the mystical triangle. If he could not do this, there would be no chance for Link to fight his way into Death Mountain, where Ganon lived. With that prologue, the player as Link sets off on an adventure into a world full of surprises. The design of the game helps the player understand where Link is and what he might do next. The main screen is divided into 2 areas: the playfield on the bottom, where Link can walk around freely, battle enemies, and discover items, and the top part, about 25% of the screen, which contains vital information. On the left is a gray rectangle representing the world map. No geography is defined, but a cursor is used to represent Link and show his movements. In the center are counters for rupees, the in-game currency, keys, and bombs. Next to that are items designated for the B and A buttons. Swords will always default to A, while items used with B are selected from a menu accessed by pushing Start. The menu offers a box to choose the items used with B. Items outside the box are automatically used. The center shows how many pieces of the Triforce have been discovered. On the right side, a health meter is measured in hearts. Damage can accrue by half a heart at minimum and can be refilled easily. When underground in a dungeon, the menu changes slightly, replacing the Triforce display with a map of the dungeon, showing spaces that have already been explored. When the map item is found, the entire dungeon map becomes visible in the same space as the overworld map on the main screen. This is enhanced with a cursor showing the Triforce location if a compass is found. This setup is very helpful when starting the game. Even without reading the manual, the player can easily understand what to do. Moving around on the first screen communicates how Link moves, that he can enter underground areas through entrances in mountains, and that discovered items are assigned to action buttons. After that, it's easy enough to learn how to use weapons, which leads to more item discovery and world exploration. It's just enough guidance to keep the player from becoming too frustrated at the start, but not enough that it qualifies as hand-holding. Each item acquired along the way opens up the next few steps in the adventure. With bombs, new areas can be uncovered. With keys, locked doors can finally be opened. Candles light up dark rooms. The Water of Life gives you a second, or even third, chance in difficult situations, but only after finding the letter that allows the old woman to sell it to you. For extra protection, there are blue and red rings, which cut incoming damage in half, and then down to 1/4. Boomerangs are helpful in stunning monsters while you attack. For really tough battles, the White Sword and Magical Sword double and quadruple Link's attack power. You can't upgrade swords without enough heart containers, which are earned by clearing each underground level. A few others are found in the field. Link needs the raft or stepladder to find some of these. Certain dungeons remain hidden until the recorder is found. Accessing some caves require the power bracelet. Some areas require bribery. The bow is necessary in order to use arrows. Each one costs 1 rupee. You cannot finish the game without all 8 pieces of the Triforce and the silver arrow, which serves a special purpose. This allows The Legend of Zelda to feel open-ended and free, but invisible guide rails are always present. Several important items have color variations. The candle, Water of Life, and ring all appear in blue or red. In each case, blue represents the weaker version, while red is stronger. Other items, as well as Link himself, start at a lower, default green level. This reinforces the idea of different levels of power that are consistent across the entire game world. Many enemies also appear in different colors. Octoroks, Levers, Lynels, Moblins, Tektykes, Gordias, Darknuts, Landmolas, and Wizrobes all exist in both blue and red varieties. Here, the color system is reversed. The red versions are weaker, while the blue ones are stronger. Blue enemies may also drop better items as a reward. A smart player learns these unwritten rules instantly, simply by recognizing color. The disc system provided more memory than ever before, and it shows, with a soundtrack bigger and longer than most games that came before, with themes for the title screen, the overworld, the underworld, Death Mountain, the game over screen, and the ending. The overworld theme is heard more than any other. With a bright, bold sound, the rolling nature of the melody encourages the player to move forward and explore further. The overworld theme is rather long for a game song, at about 1.5 minutes. With much of Link's time spent above ground, it remains enjoyable without repeating too quickly. This overworld theme is reused for the title screen, though that wasn't always planned. Composer Koji Kondo had originally envisioned the startup music based on French composer Maurice Ravel's Bolero, written in 1928. Kondo believed the piece was in public domain, but he was off by a few years. At the time, Japanese copyright law protected musical works for 50 years after a composer's death. Ravel passed away in December 1937, meaning the work would not enter the public domain until 1987. It was still protected, forcing a last-minute change. The Underworld theme is written to be shorter, to repeat often, with strong bass lines. It closely resembles the underground music in Super Mario Bros., where mood enhances gameplay by creating tension and uncertainty. Death Mountain intensifies this feeling with a faster, more frantic bass line, emphasized by the fact that this music is heard nowhere else in the game. The ending theme is bright and bouncy. It's celebratory. It marks the moment when the hero saves the day. The game over music shares only a small fragment of that melody, something most players do not recognize until they reach the ending. Because in both cases, the message is clear. This is where the story ends. Beyond the music, sound effects add excitement to the experience. Explosions, enemy cries, slamming doors, boomerangs cutting through the air, the clink of rupees, and fairies restoring health all reinforce those actions. Along with this are musical flourishes that signal when a secret has been uncovered, a new item has been found, or a hard-earned victory has been achieved. While the efforts of Shigeru Miyamoto, Takashi Tezuka, and Koji Kondo are well known, none of their ideas would have reached the screen without the work of the programming team led by Toshihiko Nakago, a man responsible for coding many early family computer games. His technical skill helped shape many of the defining traits of The Legend of Zelda. The game's top-down viewpoint led to a visual approach that was unusual at the time. To fill the screen, Nakago and his team relied on detailed tiling techniques. These tiles, small graphic blocks that formed the game's environments, were filled with subtle textures and patterns to suggest depth and terrain. In the underworld, the tiles are more ornate and structured, signaling that these spaces are artificial and enclosed. The layout and borders help players understand which areas are walkable, which spaces can be moved, and which places lead elsewhere. Perhaps the most important technical feature of The Legend of Zelda, and a major selling point of the disk system, was its ability to save progress. When Link loses all his hearts, the game over screen appears with 3 options. Continue allows the player to restart from the last entrance used. Save records the current progress for future play. Retry sends Link back to the last save point. The game provides 3 save files, each showing a custom name along with the number of heart containers collected and the number of times the file has been played. With so many secrets built into the game, one more was hidden directly in the hardware itself. Controller 2 on the family computer included a built-in microphone. Most players treated the microphone as an afterthought, making Nintendo's decision especially clever. The instruction manual states that Pole's voice hates loud noise. Pole's voice are rabbit-like enemies with large ears found in certain dungeons. While they can be defeated with normal weapons, doing so takes considerable time. Speaking loudly into the microphone defeats them instantly. From the first day of planning, The Legend of Zelda was designed to fill both sides of a single discard. Toshihiko Nakago programmed the game to maximize this space efficiently. The overworld was treated as one continuous area within the game's memory, as all of its regions were interconnected. The underworld, while physically separate, was also managed as one unified area within the code. This efficient organization left a small amount of unused space on the disk. Because of this, additional data could be added late in development. The team used this remaining space to create a second quest that unlocked after completing the main game. This new mode rearranged dungeon layouts, item locations, and enemy placements, offering a more challenging version of the adventure. Since most of the graphics were already in place, only small changes in the game code were needed. With minimal additional memory, Nintendo was able to create what was essentially a second game hidden inside the first, where Link can retrieve the Triforce of Power and defeat Ganon once and for all. By the end of 1985, development on Zelda wrapped up. Nintendo was ready to move into Phase 2 of the family computer. With new hardware, a new storage medium, and an all-new game. At the time, the largest home game ever made. Gearing up for 1986, The Legend of Zelda, the Hyrule Fantasy, was ready to take its first steps into the great unknown. With the success of the family computer, a cottage industry of gaming media soon emerged among the mania. Home computer magazines, which had often been used to share programming code and review hardware setups, began covering TV games. These eventually branched off into their own publications. Family Computer Magazine, known as Famimaga for short, was among the first, appearing in the summer of 1985, covering Nintendo exclusively on every page. The first public announcement of Zelda appeared here in its December 1985 issue. Without a single photograph, Famimaga proclaimed that The Legend of Zelda would be the first must-have game of 1986, going into detail about this new and exciting real-time adventure game featuring over 600 screens of gameplay that was impossible on a standard cartridge. Further information followed, including the need to collect golden triangles of power. More news followed in the February 1986 issue, first published on January 8th. An impressive 3-page full-color preview highlighted a nearly finished version of the game. The first page proudly proclaimed, "The disc era has begun, with Zelda as disc game number 1. The plot, featuring Link, Zelda, and Ganon, was explained, along with the game's mechanics and some of the items and enemies players would encounter. The Triforce was still referred to as the Power Triangle, and some elements were missing. But it was an exciting sneak peek into Nintendo's first game of 1986. Several pages later, the disc system was shown in great detail, with a full explanation of how it worked, why it was worth investing in, and why discs were the future for Nintendo. The disc writer was also reviewed, including a rundown of how games could be obtained for only 500 yen, and a list of retail locations where disc writer machines were ready to be installed. The issue concluded with a one-on-one discussion between Shigeru Miyamoto and Masanobu Endo of Namco, the creator of Xevious and the Tower of Jiraga. Much of the article had the two reviewing the games of 1985, with heavy emphasis on Super Mario Bros. Some of Miyamoto's design philosophy was discussed, including his belief that making a video game was much like making a movie, and that game design required optimism when facing the realities of programming ideas onto the screen. Zelda was not mentioned by name, but the disc system was. He hinted at the future, saying that with discs, we will see a brand new type of game, something no one has ever seen before. The March 1986 issue of Famimaga, published on February 8th, featured even more coverage on The Legend of Zelda, announcing its release date of February 21st and its price of 2,600 yen. The feature again covered gameplay and emphasized exploration and discovery. Several pages detailed overworld and underworld enemies, complete with charts showing their strengths and weaknesses. Ganon was left shrouded in mystery. It all led to February 21st, 1986, the debut of the Family Computer Disk System and The Legend of Zelda. A series of TV commercials hit the airwaves, introducing the disk system and Zelda to the masses, starring Tokoro George and Konomi Mashita, who often appeared together on George's show. Printed flyers adorned racks of many game stores as the first copies were placed on shelves. Sales were strong on that very first day, with thousands of happy owners playing as Link for the first time. With the industry still very young, precise figures from the time are not available. According to Famimaga, The Legend of Zelda debuted at number 2 on its sales chart. Starting with a smaller overall user base due to being a disc card game, and facing strong competition, The Legend of Zelda never achieved the distinction of being a number 1 bestseller in Japan. However, sales were steady, and word of mouth began to spread. Early players were often struck by how confusing or difficult the game could be, but also by how rewarding it was to explore, and satisfying to uncover its secrets. Those early adopters told their friends, and soon everyone was talking about The Legend of Zelda and its many mysteries. More coverage followed in Famimaga. Every issue throughout the spring and summer of 1986 featured pages devoted to the game, eventually covering the entire overworld, most of the underworld, the second quest, and the location of key items. Some secrets were still kept under wraps. Another gaming magazine, Famicom Tsushin, later known as Famitsu, appeared on June 20th, 1986. The coverage of The Legend of Zelda was equally thorough in this new publication. In its very first issue, Famitsu rated the game using a system very different from today's familiar 40-point scale. 4 reviewers evaluated 5 categories: graphics, excitement, impression, depth, and overall, on a 5-point scale, represented by weather icons. No reviewer awarded a perfect score. Tokuma Shoten, the parent company of Famimaga, compiled all the Zelda maps and strategies from issues across 1986 into a single guidebook, a must-have for any serious player. Several publishers later followed through with their own strategy guides. Throughout this period, The Legend of Zelda remained on the Japanese sales charts, staying in the top 10 for much of 1986, as disc system adoption grew. It was the only place for new games. Nintendo had no plans to release games on cartridge ever again. Sales continued into 1987 and beyond through the disc writer service, where 500 yen rewrites kept the game accessible and relevant. Years later, Nintendo reported lifetime Japanese sales of The Legend of Zelda, 920,000 units sold as full-price package discs, and 440,000 disc writer rewrites. It was a significant success, but far from the end of Link's journey. During Zelda's development, Nintendo had exported the family computer to America. Soon, Link would join Mario overseas. As Shigeru Miyamoto and his team were putting the finishing touches on The Legend of Zelda, Nintendo of America was preparing the overseas version of the family computer, the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES for short. The system went on sale on October 18, 1985, debuting with about a dozen and a half of Nintendo's best games from Japan. Though it was well received by American players from the start, the NES was not a giant success due to its staggered regional rollout. When The Legend of Zelda first went on sale in Japan, the NES was primarily available in New York and California, though some individual retailers in other states managed to join the first wave. By the summer of 1986, Nintendo was officially distributing to more than 20 American cities, and by the end of the year, the system was available nationwide. With Super Mario Bros. Included as the pack-in game, the NES became the TV game of choice for the rest of the decade. There were early plans to import the family computer disk system, and some media outlets reported on these intentions. However, inside Nintendo of America, there were concerns about splitting the market with a second piece of hardware, distracting from the primary goal of getting the NES into homes, which was progressing well, but not yet complete. While weighing this decision, Nintendo developed a technological breakthrough, a new microchip for family computer and NES cartridges, the Memory Management Controller, MMC for short. The MMC-1 chip extended the system's memory beyond its original limits by allowing the game program to switch between different banks of data. With this technology, cartridge games could reach 1 megabit and beyond. With the MMC-1, cartridges could also include static RAM. Instead of writing directly to a disk, SRAM worked in conjunction with a small battery. When the NES was turned off, the battery supplied enough power to keep the game running. With these improvements, plans for the disk system in America were thrown away, and The Legend of Zelda for the NES was given the green light. Bringing the game from Japan to the United States required many changes. Language was the most obvious. The game contained roughly 25 different message screens that guided Link through his adventure. Few games had ever required so much text to be translated. Early NES titles were short and action-focused, and many had not even been programmed in Japanese to begin with. With the translation came a new font, the same seen in Super Mario Bros., which would become standard throughout the NES era. Converting Zelda from a disc to a cartridge was an even greater challenge. Many of the enhancements that set the Japanese version apart had to be removed. The tones from the additional sound channel used in the disc system version were eliminated. Other sound effects were altered. During this process, certain areas were also refined. On the disc system, some dungeon rooms were completely empty. On the NES, keys were added to increase the challenge and make the dungeons feel more balanced and full. The Pole's voice were reprogrammed to be weak to arrows, as the NES did not have a microphone to speak into. There were also minor technical differences. The disc system required players to eject and flip the disc to side B during startup, and load times could occasionally be long. The NES version eliminated that. However, to ensure that save data was preserved, a special screen was added, reminding players to hold the reset button while turning the power off. Some of the most important adaptations happened on paper. A small team at Nintendo of America published the first Nintendo Fun Club newsletter, created in response to frequent calls to Nintendo's tip hotline. It answered common questions and shared news about upcoming games. The team was led by Howard Phillips, who selected many early NES titles from Nintendo's Japanese lineup and was the first American on record to play The Legend of Zelda. In early 1987, The Legend of Zelda received its first American preview, calling it the best of both worlds, the depth of a computer game with arcade action, and describing it as a game packed in gold. That wasn't just clever wordplay. Nintendo was making a promise by delivering The Legend of Zelda in a gold box with a gold cartridge, packaging that stood out from the rest of the NES library, which were black boxes featuring pixelated artwork, meant to show the advanced high-definition graphics of each game pack. Zelda's presentation went beyond that. Its packaging resembled a hardcover book featuring a simple logo and a shield engraved with a heart, a key, and a lion, with a cutout revealing the gold cartridge inside. A hidden treasure and a world of adventure in a faraway land. In the summer of 1987, Nintendo published the third issue of Fun Club News, which now featured colored photos and was presented as a proper magazine. Artwork from The Legend of Zelda adorned the front cover, and a preview with maps and strategies was inside. Everything was ready to go for August 22nd, 1987, the day The Legend of Zelda was released for the NES in America. The extra love and care of a 1 megabit game in a gold box and cartridge came at a price, $44.95, the most expensive video game ever made up to this point, but definitely worth every cent. A day-parted television ad campaign made it to the airwaves, announcing to everyone that Zelda was here. One featured 2 kids discussing and playing the game. The other featured a man locked away in a dark room, screaming Zelda's name, along with the names of enemies in the game. Both were strange and funny in their own ways, but the most effective marketing still came directly from Nintendo itself. Nintendo Fun Club News continued to publish hints and strategies for The Legend of Zelda. Issues beyond August 1987 covered the 9 bosses of the underworld, secrets of items like the recorder, and more hidden locations in the overworld. The sense of community fostered in the pages of Fun Club News offers a detailed view into the public reception Zelda had in those early days. Readers submitted their own reviews, secrets discovered through trial and error, and voted for their favorite games. For the very first ranking, The Legend of Zelda was number 1 by a large margin. The dominance continued in later issues. For those who felt that Fun Club News did not offer enough Zelda coverage, the Tokuma Shoten Strategy Guide was translated into English by Nintendo of America and sold as a standalone guide, Zelda, Tips and Tactics. Across 100 pages, the guide detailed every step of the game, but still encouraged players to work some things out on their own by including a tearaway map of Hyrule with stickers to mark fairies, money games, and other locations as the game was played. Back in Japan, Famitsu magazine tracked sales of NES games, despite no such records existing stateside. Zelda debuted at number 3, then quickly moved to number 1. Newer games occasionally bumped it down a few spots, but it often returned to bestseller status and never left the top 10 throughout 1988. All those sales numbers added up, making The Golden Game a platinum seller, the first game of the NES era to sell over 1 million units. In 1988, that was about 1 in 4 Nintendo households. In mid-1988, Fun Club News expanded into a full-fledged bi-monthly 100-page magazine, Nintendo Power, a massive jump from the 10-page pamphlet with monochrome drawings just 1 year earlier. The first issue of the new magazine had Super Mario Bros. 2 on the cover. Inside, however, was a full spread on Zelda's second quest, something that had only been mentioned briefly throughout the previous year of coverage, but was now fully revealed. For the first time, readers could access the most obscure secrets from the most difficult parts of the game. After a year on sale, The Legend of Zelda began to step back from its prominence as newer games took the spotlight. But in the pages of Nintendo Power, Zelda continued to appear in the Counselor's Corner and Classified Information sections. The Power Chart was also a place where Zelda could always be found. In the very first issue of Nintendo Power, the game ranked at number 1. The charts were based on a combination of sales data and readers' opinions. Both reflected the staying power of The Legend of Zelda, which found itself back at the number 1 position from time to time. Zelda was re-released in a standard gray cartridge in the final years of the NES, staying in print to the very end, with lifetime sales of over 4.5 million units, the second best-selling standalone NES game of all time. In December 1994, Nintendo Power featured NES coverage for the last time. On the final 8-bit power chart, Zelda ranked number 1 yet again, with the longest streak in the history of the magazine, 75 consecutive months. A fitting way for the first million-selling game to go out on top. The success of The Legend of Zelda confirmed what Shigeru Miyamoto knew all along, that a huge open-world game would have appeal. He was also right about Zelda becoming a franchise in its own right. Almost as soon as Zelda debuted, plans for a sequel were underway. Not even 12 months later, on January 14, 1987, The Adventure of Link arrived for the disk system. The new game was very different, with horizontally scrolling levels, an experience point-based leveling system, magic spells, no rupees, and villages with very talkative townsfolk. There was now a third Triforce, and the goal was not to defeat Ganon, but to keep him from rising from the dead. The Hyrule fantasy was dropped, and the series itself began to be known as The Legend of Zelda, with The Adventure of Link being the only game to be numbered in the series. A third game, A Link to the Past for the Super Famicom in 1991 and Super NES in 92, set many elements of the series in stone forever. A return to the top-down format, parallel light and dark worlds, and more focused, systematic dungeon designs. The story was more developed, and the game was filled with dialogue from start to finish. A Link to the Past also made huge changes to the Zelda timeline, suggesting that there were many Zeldas and Links in the universe. From there, the series continued to expand to every piece of Nintendo hardware, save for the Virtual Boy. Many of the games in the series, such as Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, have received perfect scores across the board, and are often called the greatest games of all time, both then and now. But the original Legend of Zelda continues to come back time and again, proving that, over 40 years later, the game can still grab an audience, whether it's being played for the first time or 500th. With advancements in cartridge technology, which coincidentally allowed Nintendo to bring Zelda to the NES, cartridges larger than a full disc started to appear around 1987, and later MMC chips pulled off graphical tricks that the disk system could not. Super Mario Bros. 3 in October 1988 was Nintendo's triumphant return to cartridges, and the Family Computer disk system was eventually phased out. In 1994, Nintendo redesigned the Family Computer, now featuring AV outputs, detachable controllers, and a look similar to the Super Famicom. 2 final games were released on February 19th, Wario's Woods and a re-release of The Legend of Zelda, now known as Zelda 1. The game ran with some of the American changes, such as different music and arrows defeating Pole's voice, but it was still the Zelda everyone knew and loved. Even though the game was basically the same, Nintendo of Japan has always considered this a separate release from the disk system version. Despite going on sale in 1994, Zelda 1 still managed to sell 330,000 units. The next year, Nintendo released an unusual peripheral for the Super Famicom, Satellaview. The add-on received satellite transmissions of playable video game data. Games were broadcast on a set schedule, like weekly TV programs. Beginning in August 1995, a special remake of The Legend of Zelda was broadcast, BS Zelda. The game was not a direct remake. The overworld and underworld maps were different, and the game ran on a timer, but it shared the gameplay mechanics of the original. The graphics were improved to match Super Famicom quality, creating the closest thing to a Mario All-Stars style presentation that Zelda would ever receive. Players could also choose between a boy or girl character, though neither were officially Link or Zelda. BS Zelda included live voice acting. During broadcasts, gameplay would occasionally stop while the old man's voice played through the TV, offering advice or story enhancements. Multiple versions of BS Zelda, each with different maps, were broadcast until 1997. The Legend of Zelda was one of the final Game & Watch systems, released in 1989 as a dual-screen unit. The Game & Watch did its best to replicate the original Zelda, complete with boss battles, but the game was still limited. Today, this Game & Watch is very rare, but you can play this version of Zelda on the Game Boy Advance as part of Game & Watch Gallery 4, unlocked after collecting 160 stars. In 2021, Nintendo released a new version of Game & Watch with Zelda 1 and 2, Link's Awakening, and a new version of the classic Vermin, with Link as the playable character. There are also alarm clock features and a new countdown timer game, with the challenge of defeating as many enemies as possible in a 10-minute time frame. In 2003, a limited edition Zelda collection was released on the GameCube in all regions around the world. The disc featured the original Zelda, The Adventure of Link, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, a demo of The Wind Waker, and a highlight reel of the series. It was never sold formally and was distributed through confusing, short-lived promotions. In Japan, it cost 500 Club Nintendo points. In the US, it was included with renewed subscriptions of Nintendo Power and in some GameCube bundles. In the UK and Australia, it was a send-away after buying other GameCube game titles. Today, the disc is a highly sought-after collectible, proof that not only were you a true Zelda fan, but also earning those stripes by maneuvering the crazy ways to acquire the collection. To celebrate the 20th anniversary of the family computer, Nintendo reissued many classics on the Game Boy Advance as the Famicom Mini series. The Legend of Zelda was included in the first batch of 10 games released in February 2004. None of them had enhancements. The idea was to play the 80s way. In Japan, the games came in clear cases with miniature replica boxes and manuals. Overseas, these games were known as the Classic NES series and had an artwork style that reflected the original packaging. Except Zelda came in a black box, not gold. The mid-2000s saw a classic gaming revival, with Virtual Console leading the way, offering hundreds of classic games. The Legend of Zelda was available on day one in every major region. Later, the game appeared again on Virtual Console for 3DS and Wii U, as well as the Classic Mini. When those were retired and replaced by Nintendo Classics for the Switch in 2018, Zelda was once again among the first batch of titles. And yes, if the hardware has a microphone, you can defeat Pol's voice with it. The game was also the very first title released on the service in an SP version. From the start, Link has the White Sword, Magical Shield, Blue Ring, Power Bracelet, 8 heart containers, maxed out rupees, keys, and bombs. All of the Triforce pieces and items in the underworld are still waiting to be discovered. SP Zelda really helps out younger players, who may be more accustomed to games with easier learning curves, as well as longtime veterans who maybe don't have as much time to play as they used to, with a helping hand to complete the game in between personal errands. With the Switch 2 being backwards compatible and inheriting Nintendo classics, the re-releases of Zelda may have reached their end. So at least take comfort in knowing that The Legend of Zelda and all our other favorites from the 80s and 90s have a safe home on modern hardware forever. When I look back at The Legend of Zelda, all these decades later, it begins and ends with that gold cartridge. Of course, the game inside is what really matters. It was fun, extremely long, and very challenging. Finishing it was extremely rewarding. But there was more to it than that. It was the entire package. The color manual, the artwork, the attention to detail that said, yes, this is a game, but it's also an experience, a unique one. It was Nintendo saying, we cared enough about you and this to make it this way. It felt like the game's value was literally backed by gold. Over 40 years later, there are still elements of the original Legend of Zelda that are fixtures of the adventure genre. Leveled items, weapons, and enemies, confusing dungeons, secrets that seem impossible but make sense once you figure them out, a fantasy world on the brink, and Triforce-like items that serve as a goal. They all come from that very first Zelda game, probably because it fits so perfectly and set so many rules in place that you couldn't have a proper adventure without them. Much like how Mario became shorthand for scrolling action games, pointing to any adventure game and saying, it's like Zelda, is just easier than any other explanation. In 1987, The Legend of Zelda was a hidden treasure. Today, it stands as the starting point for adventure games. Put the two together, and it sums everything up nicely. The Legend of Zelda is the gold standard.